Hello. Recently we talked about converting power ratios and voltage ratios to decibels. Now we're going to talk about converting absolute quantities, such as watts or volts or multiples of those units, into decibel units. We'll discuss this and also show some examples. Please see the video description for a full list of disclaimers, including the ones here, plus a timeline and helpful resources and links. Please support the channel by using our affiliate links. Decibels are a logarithmic way of expressing ratios, and we're still going to be doing that in this video. However, the ratios will be the ratios of an absolute quantity to some reference quantity. And we're going to look at 3 examples. First, we'll look at an example of an absolute power level where the power level is greater than the reference power. In the second example, we'll look at an absolute voltage level and express it in decibel units for the case in which the voltage level is less than some reference voltage level. And in the third example, we're going to convert absolute quantities or an absolute quantity from dB relative to a reference quantity to dB relative to a second reference quantity. To start with, we'll consider a power level that's greater than a reference power level. And in this case, we'll express the power 200 milliwatts in dBm, which is decibels relative to 1 milliwatt. So the general approach to doing this, to expressing power in dBm, is to take 10 times the log base 10 of that power level divided by 1 milliwatt. And in this case, we'll plug in the value 200 milliwatts, which, as you can see, is greater than 1 milliwatt. And this gives a value of 23.01 dB, and then with final letter M for milliwatts. In our second example, we'll consider a voltage level, and that level will be less than the reference voltage. We're going to convert voltage level of 8 millivolts to dBV, and that is decibels relative to 1 volt. Now, two things are going to be different in this example. One, we're working with voltages rather than power levels. And so that changes the way that we convert ratios to decibels. The second difference is that the absolute quantity that we're going to be representing in decibel units is less than the reference quantity. And so we'll see a difference in the result because of that. Okay, so to start with, we just recall that we're going to be representing this voltage in dBV, and because we're working with voltage ratio, this will be, rather than 10 log, it will be 20 times log 10, log base 10, of the voltage divided by the reference voltage, which in this case is 1 volt. And we'll go ahead and plug in the voltage level that we are using in our example, which is 8 millivolts. And we can further simplify this and this will be 8 times 10 to the negative 3. Okay, there's more than one way you could do this. One would be to use a calculator, and another is to recall that multiplication in ratios becomes addition in decibel units. So as a result, we could say this is 20 log 10 of 8 plus 20 log 10 of 10 to the minus 3. Okay, so this 20 log 8 becomes 20 log 10 8 becomes 18.06, and this 20 log 10 of 10 to the negative 3 becomes negative 60, because by definition log 10 of 10 to the negative third is equal to negative 3. We multiply that by 20 and we get negative 60. And so we can write that V is equal to 18.06 minus 60, or negative 41.94 dB volts, or dBV. We see two things here. One is, because we're working with voltage ratios, we use 20 log 10. And second, because the voltage that we're representing in dB units is less than the reference for the dB units, that is that 8 millivolts is less than 1 volt, then the result is a negative number of dB in that unit with reference to the voltage 1 volt. So we get negative 41.94 dBV, and that corresponds to 8 millivolts, which is the voltage that we started with. In our final example, we'll be converting between decibel representations of absolute quantities relative to different reference values. And in this case, we'll convert between dBm, or decibels relative to 1 milliwatt, and dBw, or decibels relative to 1 watt, because these are common decibel units for expressing absolute power levels. So to start with, we have the equation for expressing a power level in dBm. And that is equal to 10 log 10 of P over 1 milliwatt. And similarly, we can calculate power in dBw as 10 times log base 10 P over 1 watt. And we can express a power level that is represented in dBw as a power level represented in dBm. And this is equal to 10 log 10 it's going to be 1,000 times the power level relative to 1 watt. So in other words, let's say if we have a power level of, for simplicity, we'll say that P equals 1 watt, then P divided by 1 milliwatt would be 1,000. And P divided by 1 watt would just be 1. So the ratio to 1 milliwatt will be 1,000 times the ratio to 1 watt. And this can be rewritten as 10 log 10 of 1,000 plus, instead of multiplication here, we're going to have addition once we've converted to dB. So plus 10 log 10 P over 1 watt. And this is P in dBW. So we can write P in dBm equals P in dBW plus 10 log base 10 of 1000, which is 30. We can also rearrange the equation to give P in dBW equals P in dBm minus 30. So this is a very useful, simple way of converting between these two types of absolute decibel units. With some caveats or conditions indicated in the notes below, we can generalize the above approach, the approach that we've just shown, for use with decibel representations of any quantity x, where x could be power, voltage, antenna gain, or some other quantity. And the way that we'll do that is to say that x in dB relative to reference 1 is equal to x in dB relative to reference 2 plus reference 2 divided by reference 1 expressed in dB. For this to work, the reference values must correspond to units of the quantity represented by x. That is, power for dBW, dBm, dB microwatts, etc., volts for dBV, dB millivolts, dB microvolts, etc., and antenna gain for dBi or dBd. We must also use the correct equation to calculate the dB values. For example, 10 times log base 10 of P over P ref for power ratios and 20 log 10 V over V ref for voltage ratios, and 10 log 10 G over G ref for antenna gains. 10 log base 10 of a quantity is used, or of a ratio is used for antenna gains because the antenna gains themselves are power ratios. If needed, we could even convert between decibel units that are based on different measurement systems, as long as the units measure the same quantity. So for example, we could convert a power level from dBW to dB horsepower. This will work as long as the scales used are linear and have a common zero value. So for example, temperatures would need to be converted to absolute temperature scales such as Kelvin and Rankine before we would try to convert them in decibels, rather than using degrees Celsius and Fahrenheit, which are relative scales, directly. To summarize, we can use decibels to express absolute quantities like voltage and power level by first finding the ratio of a specific absolute quantity to a reference level of the same quantity, and then converting the ratio to decibel units. A letter or letters are appended to dB to specify the reference level that was used. For example, power in dB lowercase m is equal to 10 times log base 10 of the power to be represented divided by 1 milliwatt, and V in dBV, or decibels relative to 1 volt, is 20 log 10 of the voltage to be represented divided by 1 volt. Note that we use 20 times log 10 because we are working in volts rather than powers, and power is proportional to the square of voltage. Further, it is possible to convert absolute measurements between decibel units that are based on different reference values. For example, to obtain power in dBm, add 30 to the power in dBW. And more generally, it is possible to convert between absolute dB units for any quantity x, provided that some conditions are met. Several additional learning resources exist and are shown here and in the description below the video. Thanks for your time. Please hit like and subscribe and support the channel by using our affiliate link if you plan to buy a featured item. We also provide consulting services and referrals.